Hi guys, Johnny O here. I'm at the body shop. I'm talking with the body guy and engine builder, the owner of the shop,
Sweet,
Frank Berard. Here's the chassis. We've already done that. I've made a video on that at one point in time. There's the motor. We did a quick video on the motor, but now we're here to talk about what he's done to the motor and talk about some motor stuff with the engine builder. This is the guy that assembled everything. This is Frank Berard, the owner of the shop. So I'll pass it over to you and let you talk about what you want to talk about.
Okay, well, we'll get started on this thing. This thing was born in a tiny little turbo 4.3, right? 4.3?
Yeah, 3.8.
Yes. We're not going to divulge every piece of information on this engine. Cute little motor, made all kinds of power from the factory. To improve upon what the factory did, we'll start with the bottom. We put in what they call a forged crankshaft, 4340. Forged rods, 4340. Pistons from the factory were really extremely well. I wish the motor was a part laying on where I could explain each piece, but I cannot. These are forged pistons, tool steel wrist pins, very thick. They're designed for the turbo boost. Getting past just roughing in, that was a rotating assembly. If you notice, the oil pan is a lot deeper. The reason for the deeper oil pan is more horsepower with more boost. You obviously heat the oil up, so you give yourself more oil volume. The purpose of the oil volume is the same with this pump that John did a lot of research on, is you want what they call a high volume pump. Pressure and volume are not relative to each other. What our purpose here is with the ports opened up and whatever, and everything larger, bearing clearances, whatever, we move a lot of fluid. The faster you can get the oil into the bearings, let me rephrase that. The faster you can get the oil through and out of the bearings, the better the motor will live. Which is what we've done, which brings us down to, we're still back at the rotating assembly. When the block was line honed, which means all the mains are now in a perfect straight line instead of half a thou up, 2 thousands down, they're in a perfect alignment. Get your proper clamping pressure when you line hone it by skimming the caps and pulling it down tight. Then you check the bore. Then you check your crank diameter. Once that is done, and you're trying to establish approximately 2.9 to 3, because it's a high revving motor, turbo boost, you want a lot of oil in there for a cushion. Your crankshaft should never make contact to a bearing for any reason. If it does, it immediately starts bearing failure. Everybody thinks that little bit of oil in there just kind of wipes around there, kind of like Vaseline on your hands, and nothing happens. Well, it actually puts a barrier that it never touches. If it touches, you've got damage occurring. I have bearings. I wish I was a little bit more prepared. I can show you what happens. It's not a good effect. So that being said, then you buy what they call oversized or undersized bearings. So in this particular case, this has standards on the mains because we're able to get the line home and the crush on the cap of the bearing, which is important, keep the bearing from moving in the saddles because the crank is just riding, floating in the middle. The connecting rods turned out to be, after everything was sized, we had to go with +1s and standards. So you buy 2 sets of bearings and you do 1/2 of a shell and +1, the other half as a standard. And that gives you your proper clearance for the oil cushion to live in. And that, like I'll repeat myself again, the purpose of this high volume, not high pressure. Pressure is fine. High volume is to get as much in as you can, keep that cushion, replace that cushion as fast as you can and as often as you can. As soon as that cushion is stalled with oil, it'll burn, causes heat, starts to burn, motor failure, very, very quickly. I think that basically covers the rotating assembly other than balancing. Balancing is a segment all by itself. But what we'll talk about is part of a blueprinting. Everybody's heard the word, my engine is blueprinting. Well, blueprinting is literally, when you blueprint an engine, it's literally sheets and sheets and sheets of paper. Everything is double checked, triple checked. I don't know how to explain blueprinting in layman's terms, but even down to blueprinting, it depends upon what tools you're using, such as you're using Powercraft. No, you're using snap-on wrenches. Now everybody says, oh yeah, well you can afford snap-on wrenches, I can't. Well, if you're blueprinting an engine of this quality and what it's supposed to do, this thing here will put out 800 horse without overdoing it. You know, it could technically make more. And the reason I say blueprinting includes your tools is, when I go to tighten this bolt up, this nut up, a snap-on wrench has an absolute precision fit to every nut, bolt, and washer. So that's why I said with blueprinting, it's also done with, let's not use snap-on tools. We can just use any good, high-quality graded tool, which is probably going to be snap-on. But whatever. Okay, now we got past the blueprint.
Okay, so we can say this engine was blueprinted then, right?
This motor is blueprinted. Oh,
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. It's blueprinted to the point that when you figure out your rocker geometrics, which I'm going to get back to in a second. Let's open this up so you got something pretty to look at first. Now we've basically done the rotating assembly. Now balancing means that the crank is balanced to the rod and the piston assembly. So at high RPMs, that it doesn't even know it's going in a circle. It's a perfect balance. An OEM block is, an OEM engine is what they call rough balance. They'll have 10,000 pistons. They have X amount of engines to put together. The rods, they're all plus or minus 2 grams, 3 grams, 4 grams. They're up and down, they're all over the place. Close enough for OEM vehicles. This is not the way this is done. This here, when it is done on a gram scale and the crank is spun with a counterweight, which you figure up weights, now you take your rod bearings, you take even your wrist pin clips, you take everything, is all weighed separately. Everything has to weigh the same. And if it's not, you trim, you grind, literally grind if you have to, and you get it identical. Then you put these bob weights where each rod journal is. You spin the crank. Then you drill the crank to get rid of weight wherever you have to. This crank assembly was done at 0, 0, 0.
Now, did the machine shop do that, or did you do?
No, the machine shop does this. This is quite an elaborate machine. It's very expensive. I pay a guy that I drive 2 hours one way because there's nobody around here who can even do the work I'm trying to do in this building. So that's the way all my motors are. 0, 0, 0. I do not want 2 grams. Let me explain something quick about a gram being out on a crankshaft. If you're spinning this motor at 8,000 RPMs and you're out 2 grams, that's over 10 ton of force is trying to push the crank out the side of this block. Very important to be as close to 0, 0, 0 as you possibly can be. And this motor is 0, 0, 0. Along with this motor, this motor, this motor, this motor, that motor, and a couple more over there. That's the way it has to be if you want something to live. So we'll get away from that because it can get very, very long-winded. Then we'll come up here to the upper end. Now we're going to get into the cylinder heads here for a second. Cylinder heads are very important. If you're running an OEM style car with a carburetor on it, you're very susceptible to, I'm putting a bigger carburetor on, I'm going to go faster. With a fancy aluminum intake manifold. Wrong answer. What you just did to yourself was you put a carburetor, a better intake. Now you come down into here, now you're in another problem. Because you only started the program. Your valves, they're too small in diameter. Okay? So now all this extra fuel and air that you can get into the combustion chamber, it can't go any further because the valves are too small. And when I'm using the plural as in valves, I'm also including the exhaust valve. Same problem. Now the exhaust valve on all cylinders.
We'll have to stop here for a second and do part 2 of this.